It's a ham radio.
The Cadillac of ham radios.
Hello everyone, welcome back to yet another episode of Ham Radio, a Stranger Things podcast. We've got a great episode for you today as usual, but first, we have a little housekeeping to take care of, and I'm going to turn it over to Jasmin to let you know where you can find us on social media and where you can listen to the podcast.
Thanks, Ashley. You can find us on Instagram at Ham Radio Media, all one word, on Twitter at HamThrow, on YouTube at Ham Radio Media, or using our handle HamRadio1983. We also have a Discord you can join, which is linked in the description of this episode. If you have a fan theory or question you want to share, you can email us at hamradiomedia@gmail.com. Ashley also has a fanfic on AO3 entitled Stranger Things College, which is also linked in the description. The podcast is available on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and much more. If you like the show, please consider leaving us a rating or review. We have a lot of totally tubular stuff coming up, so be sure to follow us on social media to keep up with the podcast and all of our new content.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Ham Radio, a Stranger Things podcast. Today we will be continuing with our script breakdown series as we talk about the epic showdown between 1 and 11 at the lab. But before we do that, I had this thought on my mind the other day when I was just reflecting on Henry and how everything he says, like with his family and how they did such awful things and yada, yada, yada. And look, I'm not saying that they didn't do some bad things. We've all fallen short. We've all done some bad things or things that we're not exactly proud of in our lives, but does that inherently make us bad or inherently make it justifiable for someone to take matters into their own hands and kill? I don't really think so, but that's beside the point. The point I'm trying to reach is, with Henry, even at 12 years old, just the concept of perception versus reality, which I think in and of itself was, in a broader scope, a theme throughout season 4 with an array of our characters, not just with Henry. But I feel like whenever we grow up, like we're children, and when we look up to people, usually family members, we think, oh, these are such good people because, they like to laugh and cut up with us and do all these great things. But yet when we start to grow up and we start to understand the world more and just cognitively, we sometimes reflect on things in the past or those people. And I feel like we think differently of those people than we did when we were younger, because we understand life more now that we are adults. And so the point is that reality is maybe not always how things are perceived when we're younger, and vice versa. And again, we don't know what exactly Virginia Creel did other than she called Dr. Brenner or set up an appointment with Dr. Brenner for him to check out Henry. We don't know what other transgressions she's done or if she has any past transgressions. I mean, I do feel like in some ways he's not exaggerating about that, because we know that he did get into his parents' memories. So yes, I'm sure that he did see some things that are unfavorable in nature, but certainly I do think to a 12-year-old child who's still not yet fully cognitively aware of the world or life in general, it's double take. Oh, this is really bad because, he just doesn't understand. So, the way he's perceiving it maybe wasn't really how it happened. It's just how he perceives it, which to that makes what he's saying here in his monologue to 11 in 1979, I think, all the more you just manic, because it's like, okay, well, you're an adult now. And so you would think that he would be able to say, well, whenever I saw these memories when I was just 12 years old, I didn't understand life at that point. But now that I am an adult and I do understand more things cognitively, okay, I can kind of understand where they were coming from. Like, for example, with Victor, with him ordering the shelling in the war. You would think that now an adult Henry in 1979 would be able to just reflect on that and go, well, my dad didn't know that there was civilians in the house. He thought it was soldiers. So I should not have really judged him for that, for something I didn't understand, but now that I do. But yet he doesn't do that. He still is, even now that I'm sure maybe understands the reality of that, he's still like, nope, what I did was justified. It doesn't matter. So I don't know. I had that on my mind the last few days, and I just felt compelled to share my thoughts on that and what I feel like makes the human mind and just humans, our psychology and our sociology and everything just so perplexing when you peel back the layers and you think about how we perceive things versus how they are in reality.
Yeah, I agree. And it's like I said with Victor, I mean, like, as a child, you look up to your parents and your family members as these holy, good, kind of godlike people. If they're good to you. Of course, there's many children out there who experience abuse and all kinds of things, and that's obviously not the case. But in Henry's case, he appears to have loving parents. So you could understand why a child that young would look at his father's actions and go, oh my gosh, you're a hypocrite. You put on this good image, but you did all these horrible things. Whereas as an adult, we can understand that in war, these things happen. Victor wasn't trying to hurt those civilians, that family. He thought there were soldiers inside. In war, these kinds of things happen. They're horrible, but it is the war that is horrible, not the individual soldiers that are sent to fight. Unless they're doing something they shouldn't be. Like, he honestly didn't know. And that obviously haunts him a great deal. And as adults, we can understand that kind of nuance. So again, we don't, like you said, we don't know what Virginia did or didn't do, but it's likely if he did see something, that had that had nothing to do with the appointment with Brenner. If he did see something, it was likely something of that level of nuance where maybe it appeared she had done something bad or not good, but there was more to the story. There was more he wasn't seeing or able to understand as a child. And as an adult, he should be able to understand this when we see him in the 70s, but he doesn't. And to me, it's a case of arrested development where he still has that rather childlike mindset. I mean, he was taken from the situation where he attempted to murder his entire family and taken into a lab environment where he was isolated for years. So it clearly arrested his developmental state. We're not meant to be isolated like that. So to me, he still comes across as like high intelligence, but still that kind of childlike mindset. And that it appears that is still the case all these decades later. Like, when our characters encounter him for them, the president in the 80s, that is still there. To the point that he justifies and says, well, I had to do this. They were horrible people. They were hypocrites. But he doesn't explain what Alice did. And considering how young she is, it's hard to imagine what a child that young could even have done to deserve, in his mind, something like that. Which I think is interesting that he leaves that part out in, quote, justifying his actions to 11. And he gives this monologue right after he just murdered a lab full of children and people. And so his point is, well, like, they were hypocrites. They claimed to be this, but they were really that. Unless, of course, his point is, I'm not claiming to be a good guy here. Humans are a blight on this earth, and I never claimed to like people. I never claimed to be a good guy, which, of course, is also true. He presented himself as a good person to 11 to gain her trust, and then did this. So he's basically doing the same thing he's accusing his parents of from the past, wherein, we as the audience can understand that his parents were adults. Adults, we deal with complex things. It's not just one-sided. Whatever he saw from Victor and Virginia obviously had multiple sides to it. There's obviously complexity to what Victor had been through. It wasn't just black and white. He's seeing it as black and white, but it's clearly shades of gray. And he himself is, right in that gray. He's saying, I had to do this, this is all justified, but he's doing these horrible things. So I think if we do find out what he saw of Virginia's, I would guess it's something like that, where there's a level of nuance to it, if it's even a bad thing at all. I mean, she could have been doing something perfectly reasonable, and in his mind, like, well, she was doing this, so therefore I had to do it. So he still seems to be in that childlike mindset, even all these decades later, of I'm right and the world is black and white and I know what to do, and anyone who crosses me or disagrees with me is wrong, which is a very childlike mindset, because as we age and grow, develop normally, we learn that the world is shades of gray and that things are rarely that simple. So jumping back into our script breakdown, last time we ended with the reveal that Henry had wound up in Dr. Brenner's care, and we saw him giving Henry the tattoo, and he was starting to explain how the program started with him. And so we pick up here with him talking to 11 in the Rainbow Room, and her realizing that he has tricked her, and him monologuing and asking her to join him.
One of the things that I noticed right off the bat when I read the script was that with the line when she goes, you tricked me, in the script, he says, saved you. You are a prisoner here, 11, just like me. To your papa, you are nothing but a lab rat, a monster to be tamed. But in the on-screen version, he says, tricked you? No, I saved you. And I love that subtle change that they did in the final on-screen version versus the script, because by this point, after we've heard him say all these things to 11, he's trying to make out to her like he's the victim, and that everything that he did in his past and everything he just did are all justifiable because, hey, he's the real victim here. My parents and Dr. Brenner and being here in this lab and all that. And so I feel like what they had written originally in the script, you don't really get to be inside in that mindset that he's having as much, because the way it's written, just like the way he says, just saved you. And he also has a God complex too. He thinks that he is superior, that he's some Superman that's doing all these things, or like a Batman type, but really he's a serial killer. That's really what he is. And so I just love that subtle change that they did in the final on-screen version, because we are able to get more so into his mind of, hey, I'm a victim. Like, no, I would not do that to you. I'm a victim just like you are, and just him continuing that manipulation of tricked you. Like, no, why would you even think that? And I just love it, because also I feel like at this point in not only this episode, but this season, the audience, we're supposed to be like, oh, this guy, he's not good, if you didn't already pick that up. And this is, in my opinion, and every time I rewatch this episode, I always have the same thought of, this is when he became Vecna. Right here in this moment, when he realized that she recognized through all the bullcrap that he just spewed, and certainly when she rejects his proposal, that in my mind is the moment he became Vecna. Maybe not in appearance, but heart and soul.
100%. You can really see the shift there. And the next part really gets me as well, where right after he says that, saved you. No, I saved you. The next line goes, a beat as 11 absorbs this. There is truth here. One sees that he has sunk his hooks into her, softens, and then he goes on with this another part of the monologue, but the truth is just the opposite. They're superior and all this stuff. And the acting here from Jamie Campbell Bower is incredible, because you see he plays this so well, it's so subtle. But he goes from being having this very rigid sort of pinched sort of look to his face, this very sinister look. And then when he realizes he's getting somewhere, he softens and he becomes the friendly orderly again. And you can see why 11 fell for this, because he's so good, he's so convincing, and he kind of slips back into this mask, and he's like, oh, I've got her, and he's talking to her in a much softer way, and he thinks he's gotten through to her, and it's so well done. And what's interesting here is that there's a change. So in the script, 11 considers his offer, but in the final version, she's like, hell no, right off the bat. In the script, 11 takes it in, there's tears in her eyes, and for a moment, like, we think she is persuaded. She looks down, then back up at 1, and no, she says. But in the final version, she doesn't even consider his offer. She just looks at this guy and is like, hell no, I won't go. Absolutely not. And she's like, no. And that look of disgust is just epic. And I think it's a subtle change, but it's a really good one, because in the original version, she's being partially persuaded by this. He's that good at manipulating her. But in the final version, she's seen enough damage, I think, she's watched him kill all his kids, and even though parts of this are persuading, there is some truth into what he's saying. She's figured out by this point that he was just manipulating her and tricking her, and his end goal is violence, is death on a massive scale, and she wants no part in that. Like, obviously she wants to hurt her bullies, who hasn't had that thought, and protect herself, but she's not someone who's in this life to hurt people, to kill them. She doesn't want to do that, and he clearly does. And so it's subtle, but I felt like the final version made more sense, because she's seen the destruction he's done. If she hadn't seen it to quite that level, I think her being persuaded would have made more sense, but because she's just seen him kill everybody, it makes more sense for her to be like, no, I'm not interested in this at all.
Yeah, and I also love in the on-screen version that little, like, shake of the head that she does with that look on her face, like, yeah, right, dude, am I gonna join you? And then she goes, no. And I just love it. However, to play a little devil's advocate here, if I may, I felt more, though, in that moment that this was present day 11 saying that versus like the 8-year-old 11, because I just can't see an 8-year-old saying no with that much confidence like that, because I personally don't really think that an 8-year-old would have fully comprehended everything that he just said, other than she just knew, like, that he killed all these people. But that's just my own take. But that doesn't mean I did not enjoy Millie's performance here. I absolutely did, but that's just a little nitpick of mine.
Yeah, I can see that. And I think the interesting thing about this sequence is that the two bleed together. 11 from the present in the is, and her from the past in the 70s. There are definitely points where sometimes it appears it really is the younger version, other times it appears more like the older version of her, and these are her memories that are coming back to her. So I think it's a mix of both, that maybe both these things are true. Maybe the decisiveness of present 11 is what we're seeing here on screen, and maybe in that moment she was less decisive when she said it. But either way, the point they're trying to get across to us is she said no, and that's what kicks off the fight that they get into. And there are several changes here as well. We see 11 throw one across the room with her powers. In the script, it says that we cut to a wide shot right away after one gets to his feet. But in the script, we linger on 11 and 1 in close-up shots for a while longer. I'm guessing they did that because they were working with what they had in terms of the actors' abilities. Like, when you script this out, you don't know how it's going to look when they act it. And clearly, both Millie and Jamie and the younger actors playing her brought their A game into this, so I think they lingered on them for a little while longer because they had such great acting to work with, and when you realize it's really jiving, you want to milk that for all it's worth, rather than immediately cutting to a wide shot. And the other thing I noticed is that in the script, one says, "I thought you were different," and then the fight begins. But in the final version, he doesn't say that at all. And we go straight from, he's on the ground, he gets to his feet. Then we go to 11, there's close-up shots, and then we get into the wide shot and the fight begins. So I don't know if they cut that because they didn't feel like it was necessary, because that's kind of established that Oh, he thought, she was different, she understood. Clearly not. And they just go into the fight. Maybe they felt it wasn't necessary. Maybe that take wasn't as good.
Yeah, so did I. And I actually kind of wish they had kept that in and spliced it into the line when he says it wasn't supposed to end like this. I feel like, not that it would have been like so necessary for it to be kept in, but I feel like it still would have been just powerful. I don't feel like it would have taken anything away for him to have said, like, as though he was talking to himself, saying, I thought you were different. And then as he's trying to kill her, it wasn't supposed to end like this. So I like the line, but I do kind of agree that the way they had originally wrote it, that it doesn't really fit that part necessarily. However, I do feel like it could have worked had they spliced it in when him saying it wasn't supposed to end like this. I could have definitely seen it. It feels like it would have been very organic, because I do feel like that's probably what he's thinking in this moment. He feels like she has betrayed him in this moment, so he does feel like she was different, because he does feel like he had her, and then the fish that got lucky and managed to get off the hook before the fisherman could reel him in, And so I actually kind of would have liked to have seen this little piece of dialogue in with the final version, but they decided not to.
For sure. And we don't know why it was cut. It's also possible that maybe that the takes that had it weren't as good. Or, they're doing stunt choreography with multiple actors and stunt doubles during COVID. So, it could just be that got left on the cutting room floor or what have you. We don't know why that was. But, yeah, I agree. I feel like it could have maybe worked if he was kind of just saying it to himself. But I don't think it fundamentally changes the scene, because like you said, it's kind of implied that that's what he's thinking at this point. But yeah, it would have been interesting to see them include it. And then from there, the electricity starts to go nuts as they're, sparring back and forth. And then we push in on 11, and memories begin to flash before her. And the memories are different. So in the script, we go right into the memories. It says 2 laughing at her, the bullies beating her mother being taken away, calling her name, the dead numbers, all these painful memories race past her faster and faster. Whereas in the final version, they start with 1 telling her about finding strength in memories from the past, and this is intercut with the other memories throughout. This is probably to set things up for a bit better for the audience, so they understand what's happening rather than just going right into it. And then we have the bullies hurting her mom calling for her, and then the dead numbers.
Yes, in the final on-screen version, which again, I actually like that better, because it is less confusing for the audience, and just to know that she is taking this guy and use it up on his advice against him. So that's what's so, brilliant about it. Yeah, it's just the pacing is better with the final on-screen version than I feel like this would have been as well. And also in the script, after these memories take place, it says, "Womb, she is suddenly overpowered. Her back slams into the wall, head clapping against the wall. Then she drops to the ground, and then he begins to drag her across the floor. But that's not how it happens in the on-screen version. They're facing off, and then she's thinking of these memories, and she's getting some leverage against him, but then he pushes back in stronger, and her feet begin to slide out from under her, and he's winning, and then he's finally able to overpower her, and then I think that's when he throws her off her feet. And that's when he begins to telekinetically drag her across the floor. And in the on-screen version, she's clawing at the ground, trying to grasp at it against the force. But it's not written like that in the script. It says in the script she grasps at fallen tables, trying to stop herself. But in the on-screen version, she's kind of clawing at the floor. So I felt like it just worked out better with the way they did it in the final cut versus how they had it written in the script.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of this scene strikes me as this worked well, I think, when they were scripting it, and then they got in there and started doing the blocking and everything. They realized where everything is positioned, or let's try some different stuff. And this gives me the vibe of they tried some different things the day of, and they found what worked the best visually. So I agree. The original version was good, but I think the final version is much stronger. And something else I noticed, which just adds so much of a creepy or element to it, is that after she's dragged across the floor in the script, it says that her now blood-splattered body is lifted up into the air, floating now in the middle of the room, unable to move, as one calmly steps up to her and says, it wasn't supposed to end like this. But in the final version, she's lifted up into the air, but she's facing away from him towards the door, and then he uses his powers to turn her body around mid-air to face him, like she can't move her limbs. It's super creepy, it's super terrifying, and I feel like it packs so much more punch than her just being in the middle of the room and he just like calmly walking over to her, because he could have lifted her into a different position, but he lifts her up into that position and then creepily like turns her around, and you see that she's fighting. She can't move her limbs. I just felt like that drove home the fact that there's this element to him where he enjoys like playing with his food. And I feel like they got that across so much better by having him turn her around. And as we later see with his victims of the present, this is really a part of his psychology, whereas in the scripted version, he's just sort of calmly walking and doing things very calmly, but I feel like you feel so much more of his anger and his determination, and you get so much more of his psychology through the final version.
Yeah, I think that too. The fact that all this guy's victims, he wants them to face him and for him to face them as he's slowly, torturously murdering them. And yeah, I think it just gives us so much better insight into his psychology of like, I don't care how old you are. I don't care if you are a 50-year-old adult or an 8-year-old child, because I'm going to slowly murder you from the inside out, and it's going to be slow and painful, and you're going to watch me and look into my eyes as I do that. And whenever he is actively like in the process of killing her here, and it zooms in to his eyes, it's like there's nothing there. Like he doesn't at all seem to be fazed whatsoever by what he is doing here. And that, to me, is always what is so absolutely chilling about him and about this scene is, again, like there's not even really even anger there. It's like there's nothing. He's just so focused on doing this, and it's also like pleasure, And the only time he does show any emotion during this scene is when she begins to fight back against him and eventually is able to overpower him. And he first is surprised, and then he's pissed off because it's like, well, this is not supposed to happen. You're not supposed to be doing that. How are you doing that? And so, yeah, I agree. I think the on-screen version it just does better for us to fully understand him as a person.
I agree, and I appreciate that they went more into his psychology, because that's what makes a good villain. And they also, I think, did that with Brenner as well this season, where they went more into their psychology, so you understood what makes these villains tick, which is the interesting part. And I think, by contrast, the fact that Sullivan and his military goons were so, like one-dimensional and flat, and we got nothing from them, was, what made them disappointing as villains, because they did such a good job of showing us the psychology behind Vecna and his backstory. And they went more into Brenner's psychology, and you really got like a more robust picture of what made these guys tick, and you really got into that. And the moments where they did it well are so good. Like, they're horrifying to watch, but they're so riveting. And then you have other moments with both villains and heroes in this season where we didn't get into that at all. It's very flat. It's very one-dimensional. You kind of got to guess as to what's going on. So I really enjoyed the fact that they went so deep into his psychology, and you really got to, understand this guy's motivation. And I mean, that's what makes a compelling villain at the end of the day. If you want to do a big bad, and the big reveal this season was that there was a person behind all this stuff that we've been seeing for 4 seasons, you really got to get into the psychology of why are they doing this? And then from there, we see Eleven's limbs start to contort as he's torturing her. And we get another change here because in the script, it says, as her limbs begin to contort and her eyes begin to bleed, abruptly we cut to black and then we hear a heartbeat and we've gone into Eleven's memories and we go straight into Eleven's birth. But in the final version, the screen cuts to black and then there are sparks and a red and white tunnel made out of wind and smoke that we go down, like the camera goes down this tunnel. I mean, the audience go along this journey, and then an operating room appears. And then from there, in the script it says, we hear a heartbeat, a voice echoes through the darkness, calling to us. We hear Terry's voice say, Jane. But in the final version, we hear a baby crying, and then see Dr. Brenner's face, and another doctor, and then we see Terry. In the script, Terry just says Jane over and over again, but in the final version, she says, Jane, I love you, and reaches for her. These scenes are intercut with the smoke and the sparks in a way that they're not in the script. And in the script it says, a baby emerges into the world, lifted into the arms of a nurse. Doctors, including Dr. Brenner, watch. We recognize this from season 2. It's Eleven's birth. We're now in baby Eleven's POV. So it's described as we're in the operating room with them, but in the on-screen version, we're going down this tunnel, and then we see it, upwards from baby Eleven's point of view, which if we're trying to show the baby's point of view, that does make more sense. Like, we're not hovering over it, we're coming from underneath. And in the final version, we see Dr. Brenner, another doctor, and Terry's face, and we hear a baby crying, and Terry reaching for her. But that's it. We don't see all the extra stuff that they describe in the script about the operating room or the rest of the room. It's, it's very sort of closed in. We have the smoke and the sparks, and it's very close up on these people's faces. And in the script, it says, it cuts to black, and then a heartbeat thumps faster and faster as a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes move past us. In the final version, we go back through the smoke tunnel, which morphs into the rainbow room. I'm guessing some of these changes were made to make it a bit easier to follow and less sort of disorienting for the viewer.
Yeah, I guess so, because I feel like that would have been so confusing, especially for the casual viewer if they did that. I think too, it would have you second guessing, okay, is this reality or is this all a dream or something that she's having? Because the way it plays out on the on-screen version, I've always gotten the feeling that they want us to believe she really did, in that moment fighting off one, she really did recall her birth straight from the birth canal. And so I feel like if they had done it the way they have it written here in the script, I feel like the audience would have been a little bit confused maybe to thinking, okay, did she really recall that? Or is this just part of simulation or something with the Nina project?
For sure. I think that's something that probably appeared in editing is, okay, the kaleidoscope might be a bit confusing. It's going to be really trippy. If we want to make it clear these are memories that are being recalled in this moment and want to make it easy for the audience to understand what we're looking at, where we're going. And I think there's a number of cases where from script to screen, I think something probably made sense to them when they wrote it down, but they went to actually do it and went, okay, we are asking a lot of our audience here. There's a ton of backstory in this season, and you got to be really on the ball to be able to follow it. And I do appreciate that they found a way to show us this stuff and explain what was going on without making it super confusing or impossible to follow. Because we've all gone to a movie or tried to watch a show and gotten partway through and gone, okay, we lost the plot here. They got way into the world building. They got way into this. They overcomplicated it. I don't know what's going on. And like I said, for a casual viewer, that would be very hard to follow. Whereas I feel like the way they delivered the information about Eleven and Vecna's backstories here, I feel like you can follow it. And even though there are some things that are up for debate, is she recalling this? Is this her in the present versus her memory? You can still follow what is going on in a way that makes sense. It's also less disorienting and less nauseating. Like, I can watch this scene and I don't feel sick, but I think the way they'd written it here, with it being like a kaleidoscope and it moving really fast, I think that would have made me nauseous. I think it would have made a lot of people. Because the way they're describing it, it's like you're literally going through a kaleidoscope, moving very quickly. And so you don't want to nauseate the viewers. You don't want them to feel dizzy. You want them to be able to follow along with the critical information. So when you bring them back in, they're not like, whoa, okay, I feel like I was on an amusement park ride. That is not what we're trying to evoke here. They're trying to show us a memory and make us understand that she's drawing this strength from her mother's love, not disorient the viewer.
Yeah, and especially when you already have all these flickering lights everywhere, you definitely don't want anyone out there getting sick. And look, I've been watching Stranger Things now for going into my 7th year officially, and it's only been the last 2 years, I'd say, that I have not kind of gotten nauseous from just watching the lights flickering. I love the effect, and it's so cool from a cinematography standpoint, but yeah, it was a lot to take when I first started watching the show.
Yeah, it's a cool effect, but it can be quite difficult to watch. And I believe this episode actually had a seizure warning on it. Like, there's a warning at the beginning talking about flashing lights and that kind of thing. Like, they did have to warn people, which is good, because this season, I think in particular, there's a lot of stuff where if you are photosensitive or you are prone to that, it's not safe for you to watch. And you can tell that they put effort into, trying to make it look cool and interesting, but also not so bad and not so trippy and so overstimulating that it would create an adverse reaction from the audience or make it, impossible for people to watch. And it's a fine line there. You want something to be, you want it to look cool and you want it to draw people in and be an interesting effect, but you don't want to go so far that it's like, oh, like you're feeling, woozy.
Yeah, and I can only imagine like what it's like for the cast and crew whenever they're filming scenes that involve the flickering lights, because that's all done practically. And I remember seeing some behind the scenes feature with Natalia Dyer when they were in the scene in the hospital, her and Jonathan in the hospital in season 3, and as you know, when they're encountering the meat monster as it's forming and those lights, oh my gosh, I think that was probably to date like the most extreme light flickering show I think I've certainly seen in Stranger Things, because they're just going on everywhere. And in the behind the scenes feature, when they were filming that, it looks just as worse. And I couldn't imagine like being an actor or crew member filming that, because I certainly would have had a headache, probably would have been very nauseous.
Yeah, it's definitely not for the faint of heart, and I'm sure the actors and crew probably do have headaches after those days. I'm sure they have to take proper breaks afterwards and stuff, because these are also very long days as well, so I'm sure you'd have a headache and probably want to sit in a dark room or your trailer or what have you, or your hotel room for a while after. So kudos to them for sticking with it, because I'm sure it has to be quite challenging as the day and the shoot goes on to continue to stand there, especially an action sequence while the lights are flickering all around you. And I mean, we're seeing it one time. They're doing take after take after take after take. And while it's preferable to it all being CGI, I'm sure it is quite challenging at times.
Yeah, and you know what else I thought of when I watched this sequence of Eleven remembering her birth? Like, the colors reminded me of the color of the gate in season 1. Did you ever like pick up on that?
I didn't, but you're right. I suppose they are trying to make a connection there.
Yeah, and it's really weird because, like, certainly in season 4, but also a little bit as we saw that crack in season 3, the gates aren't that color anymore. So I don't know if that was a budgetary thing from season 1 to now, or because in season 4, Vecna he's trying to open gates, and maybe they're trying to give that distinction of the colors of what it looks like, when 11 opened the gate versus when he's opening gates because he's evil and she's not.
Yeah, that could be. It could also just be like the evolution of the Upside Down. There's still a lot we don't know about that. And the Upside Down, as we see it in season 1 versus what we see in season 4, is different in the sense that it's really evolved. And even the stuff we see coming out of the Upside Down as time, goes on, there's definitely an evolution there. So I don't know if it's, like you said, they're trying to distinguish between good versus evil, or if it's more about how the gate is opened, who's doing it, or if they're trying to show the evolution of this other dimension over time.
Yeah, and a popular observation / theory throughout the years since season 1 is that the gate looks like a uterus. And so, and like when 11 in season 2 escapes from the Upside Down in the school, when she goes through like the veil, it looks like the birth canal and all that. And there is some plausibility, obviously, with that. I don't know if that's what the Duffer Brothers had intended with that, but that's how it clearly came off to look to some viewers. So again, who knows, with this connection of her remembering her mother, her birth, and then her mother saying, "I love you," and then we know she's able to use that memory to her advantage, and then she eventually opens the first ever gate, or at least that we know of, by using that memory. I would have liked to have seen the Russians get the job done in season 3 so that we could at least see what that one would have looked like if they had been able to successfully open it completely. I think that probably would have given us a little bit more of an answer there, because when they're trying to open it, it looks just like a straight hairline crack pretty much.
Yeah, it would have been interesting to see what theirs look like versus if it's quote a man-made opening versus a more natural opening from the people with powers. And I could see it being symbolic, about rebirth and death, and because we have people going through them and coming back out of them and that kind of thing. So I could see it maybe being I don't know if it was intended to be kind of symbolic and about rebirth and passing from one dimension to another, one plane to another. And whether they intended that or not, it's definitely, it's kind of obvious now that that's what it looks like. But it certainly would have been interesting to see what the one the Russians were trying to create would have looked like. And it's really interesting where we see her drawing strength from this memory of her birth and her mother's love. And, we see earlier her mother being taken away from her. And at first it seems like she tries to focus on and trying to harness those memories of anger and sadness like one does. But then I think you see through the evolution that she realizes that no, that love, that's the emotion she needs to focus on, because in season 2, we see her, Callie, getting her to harness her powers through anger to move the bus. But she's seeing here, she goes back to her old memories that, anger can be a powerful force, but so can love. And love is a much more powerful force when harnessed correctly. And that's something that Henry doesn't feel, obviously. So she's able to overpower him here because she's able to draw on that strength in a way he can't. He's only drawing on negative emotions, not positive ones. And the interesting thing about this, that her mother's love and being that source of strength, is that in the real world, studies have shown that being held by one's mother or someone that loves you and being shown love and affection after birth and the first few years of your life can have a positive impact on children and their ability to feel compassion and survive abuse in the years that follow. So children that experience that and then wind up in a different situation, wind up being abused or suffering, having had that in your first few years of life or, at birth, at some point during that early period, can actually help you later on to be able to, relate to people who survive that kind of abuse. It does help in the long run. Of course, if you don't experience that, you can, of course, overcome that. But they found that neurologically, the fact that those pathways form and you feel that love and compassion and connection and that physical connection to someone can really help you and the physical and neurological impact it has on you as a child. And so I think it's really interesting. I don't know if that was part of what they were trying to connect there, if they know about that study, but I thought that was interesting because it's a real thing in real life, in real science, that having had that love and connection at birth can help you later on. And I think it is one of the reasons that 11 isn't as easy to control or manipulate or turn to the dark side as Henry and Brenner think she's going to be. They're expecting her to be easy to manipulate, and we don't really know what the experience of the other children was, what they were exposed to. We don't really get into that. But 11 definitely had that love in her life, and so I think when we meet her in season 1 and she, for the first time in years, experiences that kind of love and affection again, she is, even though not consciously able to recognize it, I think unconsciously there's a part of her that is able to accept it and connect with it. And whether they knew that or not, I thought that was a really cool connection, that this is in life a real thing, that if you experience this early on, it can help you be able to form those kinds of bonds later on, either in childhood or as you get older.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, you bringing that up because Ted Krasinski, the Unabomber, actually when he was born, his mother could not hold him initially because I think he was like sick or something, like immediately after he was born, like there was something wrong like physically with him when he was born, so they had to take him from her, and he was in and out of the hospital for the first few months of his life, and so he wasn't able to have that connection with the mother that early on. And Ted Krasinski is also, I believe, around the same age as Henry would have been if Henry were real. And Ted Krasinski also had his own monologue of sorts with his manifesto, and he also had his own gripe with society. And it was also alleged that he was involved with some MK Ultra experiments in college himself. But, he was a brilliant, intelligent mind. But in this documentary I watched talking about his life and stuff, when they were talking about this, there was a psychologist on there who said that played a big part in his psychological makeup because he did not get that mother's connection when he was, an infant. And it did, that did shape a lot of who he would become later in life. So yeah, it's there's a real life example of that for you.
Yeah, and it's interesting the more you go into this. So something else I've read is it's standard practice now that when a baby is born, if possible, they will put the baby on the mother's chest so that they can feel that physical bond. And if that's not possible, they'll have them be held by somebody else, another loved one, or, if a baby has to be put into an incubator, you have where you can put your hands in and to be able to touch them safely. And so that wasn't actually standard practice up until quite recently. They did it with me when I was born, but it wasn't standard practice up until a bit later. And they've actually learned that just that physical contact, at birth has all of these health benefits physically and mentally. And it's something they're still exploring with the research, but something I learned is that plus holding a baby, walking around with them, those kinds of things, that skin-to-skin contact, or if that's not possible, some kind of contact, even if it's through a blanket or something they have to hold them with, helps immensely. It helps everything from physically and mentally to helping them get stronger. And that there's, the pheromones you give off, all these kinds of things that wasn't standard when I was born, but today it is. And they found that just those simple things can have such a huge impact on whether a baby lives or dies, if they get better, the ability to bond and connect with others, if you're exchanging the right pheromones. Interesting fact, I learned this. So how people will talk about new baby smell? When a baby is born and they're little and people are holding them, some people will smell that that nice new baby smell. So what I learned is that if you are receptive, if you are happy to be holding the baby and you want to connect with that baby, whether you gave birth to that baby or not, you will smell the new baby smell, and the baby gives off the smell, and you receive it, and you smell the smell, and you hold them, and it's a bonding thing. But people that don't like babies or don't want to be around babies or don't want to hold that child or not receptive to it cannot smell new baby smell because they don't pick up the pheromone, they don't give off the pheromone in return. People used to think this was just a natural thing that happened to everybody, but it actually depends on how you're personally feeling about it, whether or not you exchange, like whether it has to be reciprocal physically and like hormonally in order for that exchange to happen, in order for the baby to benefit. If you don't feel that way, if you're not receptive, it doesn't work. So I thought that was really cool. Say, nature versus nurture, but it turns out that if you being receptive to it and wanting to exchange in that actually makes a huge difference as to whether, the baby will benefit from that physical contact.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. That's really cool. That's the first time I've ever heard of that. But yeah, I mean, it definitely makes sense because I know people often associate the exchanges of hormones, like being excreted amongst like animals. That's how they bond. Like I knew, like with dogs and cats, like that's how they will bond with their newborn. But I didn't know that about humans. And it's like, when you think about it, humans, we may not always realize it, but humans, we also communicate with our hormones other than just sexual hormones. And I think it's, again, another cool aspect of the human body.
Yeah, it really is. And I think we like to believe that we're so far removed from our animal counterparts, but we're really not. We have a lot more in common than I think a lot of us would like to believe. And funny story, I had a friend who could never understand what people meant by new baby smell. Kids aren't her thing. She's a good person, but they're just not her thing. And so she could never understand what people were freaking talking about. Because she's like, what do you mean new baby smell? Because she couldn't smell the smell. And people just thought she was nuts. And it's like, no, you literally, it can't smell it if you're not receptive to it. Like our animal counterparts. It's not a given. Which is interesting because the old kind of theory of like, well, all women are meant to do this. No, we're not actually. Sometimes you just can't smell the smell. You just can't reciprocate. And so every baby, every child deserves to be with someone who can, right? Who is able to engage with that. And that's our show. If you like what you heard today, be sure to subscribe and tell your friends. Our theme music is provided by Neon Knights. Thank you for listening to this episode of Ham Radio, a Stranger Things podcast. Please join us next time, same dial, same time.
Over and out.